From 1985 to 1990, women began turning up deceased in and around the Frankford neighborhood, a suburb of Philadelphia, sexually assaulted, stabbed, and discarded like the city wouldn't notice, since the victims were the kind of people the city had already stopped looking at. Women involved in sex work and those with severe mental health concerns. Join us today as we discuss the Frankford Slasher. Welcome back to
Unknown,
Unsolved,
Unseen.
Triple U.
I'm your Pennsylvanian host, Frank.
And I am your Pittsburgh Penguins host. Well, Pittsburgh Penguins fan host, Sage.
Woohoo, and welcome back. This is a podcast where we talk about all things weird, unknown, and unsolved, whether it be true crime, aliens, ghosts, cryptids, or something else that goes bump in the night. We're the place where you can find it all.
That is us.
And Sage, what do we have today on the menu? Actually, before I go into anything real quick, announcements. We are hopefully going to be back to regular posting schedule between who's alternating on episode schedule and who is also talking that, and additionally post on the social medias within the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're hoping to get back on the regular. And additionally, we do have some collaborations being worked on with a handful of podcasts right now.
We sure do.
Yeah, you guys can get to hear about some spooky stuff, some creepy stuff, just stuff.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty brutal, very graphic in its descriptions. So the trigger warnings today, it's more lengthy than others. There is mentions of stabbing and slashing, blunt force trauma, rape and sexual assault, including with an object, racism and prejudice, as well as descriptions of murder victims and crime scenes. So if those aren't your jam, we will see you next week for Frank's episode.
Which will also have some trigger warnings, but not as severe as this. Where you can go back and check last week's episode where we talked about aliens and their love of interior design.
Woo! So, in honor of the Philadelphia Criers winning the series with the Penguins.
Fuck the Flyers, but at least, hey, their ECHL affiliate got knocked out by the Penguins, ECHL affiliate. Fuck the Reading Royals, who had a kid, not directly, but kind of in a way, went up to me and walked up to me in the intermission and said, I suck dick.
Crazy.
A fucking child.
So I figured, because of that, I would take us to the city of brotherly love, or brotherly shove, if you're into football. And
push.
While I myself hate Philadelphia and I don't see it as any kind of love, I'm sure there are some out there who do. And so, do with this what you will. However, that sways your opinion. So what is definitely not representative of brotherly love is that of an unknown serial killer that operated in the suburbs of the city during a reign of terror from 1985 to 1990. Named the Frankford Slasher, based on the suburb of Philadelphia that the killer had operated in, it is still unknown who this killer is and whether true justice will ever be achieved for the victims in the city. And unfortunately, due to being unsolved, we are discussing the case here today.
This is Frankford, like Frankford, right?
Yes.
It makes you think of the Frankfurt sewer murders, which we covered a long time ago. More Frankish murders. And yes. I swear, as a Frank, I am not doing any Frankish murders.
I'm glad you're not doing them.
No Frankish murders are just, for me, just being quite frank about being Frank.
So, Frankfurt is known as a middle-class neighborhood located northeast of Center City. Despite being considered a melting pot of racial and ethnic identities, Frankfurt is known for its prominent racial divide, where the black community predominantly lives on the eastern side and the white community predominantly live on the western side. I'm not sure if this is still the case to this day, but I do believe it was like this when the murders were happening in the 80s and early 90s. So I'm not super sure how the divide goes today. But during the reign of the slasher, Frankfurt had shifted from a once thriving neighborhood that was famous for its shops and music scenes to hard times due to the proliferation of crack cocaine, a rampant economic crisis, and poorly planned civil engineering. The Frankford Slasher would use this to his advantage to remain hidden in the shadows, attacking unsuspecting women and terrorizing the city for nearly 5 years. So we're going to start with the victim. So there's not necessarily like a whole ton of investigation for this because it is unsolved and unseen and unknown. We're just going to go through the victims. They provide the most context for the story.
All right, I'm ready.
So the Frankfurt Slasher struck first in the summer of 1985 when 52-year-old Helen Patton of Middletown Township, Bucks County, was found on August 26th in a Philadelphia train maintenance yard between rows of stacked railroad ties. She was found with her legs open in a sexually suggestive and obscene pose, and her blouse had been pulled up to expose her breasts. There were signs of sexual assault, and her body had been stabbed 47 times between her head, chest, arm, and a deep cut in her abdomen that allowed for her internal organs to be exposed to the elements. She was well known as a frequent patron of local bars in the area, and detectives were able to determine that the last time that she had been seen alive was actually a week prior, on August 19th, by her former husband, Kermit Patton, whom she had still lived with at the time.
So, 47 stabs. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's not even the most, out of these cases, too.
Oh, wow, okay.
But that's still a hell of a lot.
It just seems like a crime of, like, a murder of hate at that point.
Major overkill.
Yeah, I know there's passion, there's just, like, murder to murder, but it seems like when you go that overkill, there's a level of hate behind it. Like, somebody who's been rejected constantly by women and blames it, not on himself, but on them, and takes out his violence on them. That's just the vibe I get so far, just from the first one.
Well, I mean, that much overkill and those stab wounds, too, is also suggestive of a sexually motivated crime as well. Like, it's
47 and, like, showing the intestines, it just seems more hateful than anything.
Yeah, it was very intense. So, 4 months later, the body of 68-year-old Anna Carroll would be found deceased in her bedroom apartment. In her apartment on the 1400 block of Rittner Street.
Are we still in 1985?
We are on January 3rd, 1986.
Okay, 86. You were talking August and you said 4 months from like December or January?
Very beginning of January.
Okay.
Of 86. So someone had found her apartment door wide open, one of her neighbors, in the dead of winter, and went in and found her deceased. She was also nude, like Helen, from the waist down and laid out in a sexually suggestive pose. However, whether this is mercifully or not, I don't know. She had only been stabbed about 6 times, but it was enough that her internal organs were also exposed to the elements because the killer had cut her from her breastbone to her groin. The stabbings had been done with a kitchen knife, and we know this because the killer left the knife within her body in one of the wounds, and it was one of her kitchen knives. And there was no sign of forced entry.
Okay, that's interesting. So no sign of forced entry, and used her own knife rather than bringing his own murder weapon.
Yes.
That's a very peculiar way to go about. I mean, I'm not trying to generalize here on older people, but it could be that she, was just a bit more naive and trusting.
Yeah, it could be.
That's just what I can think of just preliminarily on this. I could very much be wrong.
Yeah. Despite the similarities in the cases, due to their scenes being 10 miles apart and one in a train yard and the other in an apartment, the police did not make the connection between the two cases and continued forward with investigations as isolated incidents. I don't know if they were within the same jurisdiction or if it was different police districts, or is that what you call them? Police districts. I'm not sure if that was the case, but either way, they kept them as isolated incidents. They didn't find the connections enough to warrant that this was a serial killer at the time.
Would you agree with that assessment at the time?
I would, just because of the location of the bodies, as well as the vast difference in the number of stab wounds. The only thing that was really the same is that they were older women, both white women, who had their organs displayed. or like laid out. After nearly a year of lying dormant, the slasher would strike again in the early hours of Christmas Day in 1986. 64-year-old Suzanne Olzef was found deceased by her neighbors after they found her apartment door left wide open as well. Again, it's dead of winter in Philadelphia. It's freezing. She was located on Richmond Street, which is about 3 miles from Helen's crime scene and 7 miles from Anna's. She'd been found stabbed in the back 6 times, so slightly different from the others. So what really brought detectives a little bit more together, understanding these might be a pattern, is that through some investigation, they were able to identify that all 3 of these women were frequent patrons of Goldie's Bar on the 5200 block of Frankford Avenue, near an elevated train terminal.
Well, that's a good way to finally,
to narrow some stuff down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sources state that this bar was known for its, quote, nightlife and drug abuse. It's also reported that it was often frequented by those who engaged in sex work or a term called barflies. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I think so.
It's individuals who were not actively looking for sex work but would engage in it occasionally.
Oh, is that what a barfly is?
Yeah. At least that's like the nickname for them.
Oh. I thought barflies are guys who just hang around bars.
I mean, that could be that too.
I thought like Homer Simpson was a barfly at Moe's.
I don't know, maybe there's different definitions. But based on this, police began to center their investigation around the bar, though they did continue to deny to the public that a serial killer was operating in the area because the murders were in 3 different parts of Frankfurt, and they didn't want to, scare the public.
Can I real quick add something?
Sure.
So barfly is a slang, often derogatory term for a person who spends a significant amount of time in bars or pubs, frequently drinking. They are often considered regulars, sitting at the bar, and sometimes they are implied to be drinking excessively. So Barney, Lenny, Carl, and Homer are all barflies at Moe's Tavern in The Simpsons.
Nice.
That's probably like the best example you can have of what a barfly is.
Yeah.
The amount of times he spends at Moe's. I mean, it's such a family establishment. He brings Maggie there at times.
Oh my gosh.
I love the original Simpsons. It's so good.
So things started becoming, quote, real for the police when a 4th victim was found.
Wasn't real at the first, second, or third.
No. On January 8th, 1987, so less than 2 weeks after Suzanne was found, so her previous victim, the deceased body of 28-year-old Jeanne Durkin was found placed underneath a storage truck behind a fruit and vegetable stand. Similar to the other, she was nude from the waist down with her legs spread open. Unfortunately, Jeanne appeared to be the most brutally attacked of all of the murder victims so far, with over 74 stab wounds to her chest, her buttocks, and her back. 74 stab wounds.
Well,
you know
I said it was
manpower?
excessive when I said 49, right?
47.
47? Okay. And this is 79.
74.
Sorry.
Numbers.
70, yeah, I know.
It's a lot of numbers.
70, holy shit. I mean, like that.
Unbelievable.
I mean, as you said, that's it. A lot of stabs happens in sex crimes, but like this is just, that almost seems purely motivated by hate.
Yeah, and it's just, do you know how much strength it takes to stab someone that many times? Which, like, I'm not saying that in an admirable way. I'm saying that in, like, what kind of frenzy are you in that your adrenaline can pump so hard for so long that you can stab someone 74 times? That's insane. So, she is reported as... Oh, sorry, do you have something?
Sorry, how? This is fourth one. How's there no DNA or any evidence left?
So, later they would be able to find some DNA on some victims, but at this time there wasn't enough, knowledge of DNA to really do anything with it. That's something that they do want to test today, though. So, Jeanne's reported as previously having engaged in exotic dancing, but recently had become homeless and was living on the streets, sleeping in the doorway of a bakery that was located next to Goldie's Bar.
Okay, I just have to ask a question here. This is not me trying to be sexist or anything, but would all these women be conventionally described as attractive?
Honestly, I never looked at their photos, so I don't know.
Okay, because that's like, I don't mean to sound sexist when I say that, but I think that's an important factor based on what we're trying to talk here.
It could be, yeah.
Is he like looking for attractive women that he could never get, or is he like, I don't know.
I don't know. With this fourth murder, police could no longer deny that there was a serial killer in Frankfurt. Thus, the media began describing the killer as the Frankford Slasher. So he got his name from the media, didn't come up with it himself.
Media always has to give a name. Zodiac Killer, Frankfurt Slasher, Night Stalker, Golden State Killer.
Yep.
I'd say Ted Bundy, but Ted Bundy was Ted Bundy.
Yeah. With his newfound attention in the media and a spotlight put on the scenes, the killer lay dormant for another year. At this time, little to no progress was made in solving the murders of the prior 4 women: Helen, Anna, Suzanne, and Jeanne. In this moment, there is a 5th potential victim prior to that year gap that, like, some people make arguments as being a victim of the slasher, and that's 29-year-old Catherine M. Jones. She was found frozen in the snow, wearing virtually no clothing, and she was murdered after being bludgeoned in the skull and the jaw, so she had a broken jaw as well. However, other than fitting some pieces of the killer's victim type, there's not really a lot that connects her definitively to the slasher, because she had no stab wounds and she wasn't sexually assaulted. Reportedly, once the police got their heads out of their asses and admitted to the potential of a serial killer in the streets of Frankfurt, they started to go through old unsolved cases and, I guess, like, just connected her to this, and maybe in what was probably a low effort way of trying to get some kind of justice when, doesn't seem like she would be the victim of this killer. But I figured I would put that in there anyway. So the actual 1-year period of dormancy started after Jeanne, unless you accept Catherine as a victim. The next victim then was 66-year-old Margaret Vaughn, who was found lying in the foyer of an apartment building in the 4900 block of Penn Street, just 3 blocks from where Jeanne was found earlier in the year. Margaret was found on November 11th of 1988. She had once lived in that apartment complex, but that same day that she was found deceased, she was actually evicted for non-payment of rent. She was stabbed 29 times and again laid out in a provocative pose, which, would become the modus operandi, or MO, of the slasher.
Real quick, sorry if you hear clacking and Marley's moving around.
Yeah. The difference with this victim, however, is that there was actually a lead. So, according to a barmaid at Goldie's, Margaret had been seen in the bar the evening before her death, drinking with a white man who had a round face, who walked with a limp and wore glasses. Middle-aged.
Oh, this is the part that's going to piss me off, because you kind of spoiled a little bit for me.
The witness was able to provide enough details for a police sketch artist to make a composite, which was distributed around town. However, even with the sketch, no one came forward claiming to be or to know the killer that was in the sketch, and thus the case had went cold again. Just over 2 months later, the slasher's next victim would be found on January 19th of 1989. 30-year-old Teresa, I apologize if I say this wrong, I think it's Italian. It's Sciortino. Sciortino. Sciortino? Sciortino? I don't know. I apologize.
I only know right now Italian brain rock ballerina cappuccina.
She was found in her apartment on Errett Street, where she had lived alone. She was stabbed 25 times and was laid out on her kitchen floor in a pool of her own blood. She was 3 blocks from where Margaret was found, and a block and a half from Frankfurt Avenue, where one of the other victims was found. She was also stabbed with a kitchen knife, the same as Anna, one of her own kitchen knives, and was slashed in the face, arms, and chest. She had been stripped of all of her clothes except for a pair of white socks.
Did all the other ones have their socks taken off?
The other ones were most all naked from the waist down, at least.
Okay.
But this is the only one that had socks left on.
Weird, random fact, I guess. Sorry, I'm just trying to... I understand, obviously, it's a outlier in it, but just like, why would that be the one?
Yeah. This next sentence is extremely graphic and very upsetting. And so if you don't want to hear it, please skip ahead about 30 seconds or so. I don't, just for your own sanity. So I'll give you 3 seconds. Ready? 1, 2, 3. So a 3-foot piece of wood was found next to her and had been used to violate her sexually after she had been raped.
Before or after she was dead, could they tell?
That I didn't get information on.
Oh my god.
That's so fucked up.
2 feet, you said?
3.
3? Oh my. Like the
piece
whole...
a 3-foot piece of wood.
Oh. Like, just the thought of that is disturbing.
Yeah. He placed the blood-stained weapon leaning up against the sink, and he also left a bloody shoe print behind. So
interesting evidence. Like,
yeah, they ended up finding later what type of shoe it was.
This is the 5th murder.
This is the 6th.
6th, and this is his first time he's getting a little sloppier in his actions.
Yeah. So Teresa, like the other victims, had frequented the Frankford Avenue Strip and often entertained male companions. So she was often seen as a sex worker. One of her neighbors said, quote, "She had a lot of company," which is interesting way to put that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a very interesting wording.
Yeah. Questioning confirmed that she was last seen alive at the Jolly Post Tavern at Griscom and Errett Streets. Someone had seen her in the company of a middle-aged white man just after 6 in the evening. Her neighbor reported hearing a lot of commotion coming from the apartment, along with what sounded to be like a loud thump, as if a large object had been thrown to the floor. Detectives confirmed that the condition of the apartment indicated that there was an intense struggle that had occurred there, that moved from one room to another, because there was blood splattered everywhere over the apartment.
Okay. So at least, like, there's that. That's more ample evidence, finally, to give an idea of, like, how these are happening.
Yeah.
But you said no 4th century, though, right?
No 4th century. She had been seen in the company of a middle-aged white man.
Besides him being middle-aged, were there any other descriptors that fit the other man who was described?
I mean, that's pretty much how the other man was described. Round-faced.
Round face, yeah, but I didn't hear round face in this case. That's why I was just curious.
There was honestly not a whole lot of information on all of this. This is kind of, pieced together from different sources. So
okay.
It's possible I could miss that description, but the big part of it, it's the middle-aged white man.
Okay.
On April 29th of 1990, at around 2 in the morning, this is our last victim. So, there's one more victim after this, but I'll explain later why. We're not going to talk about that one yet. The body of 46-year-old Carol Dowd was found in an alley behind a Frankford Avenue fish market by a patrol officer. She had been raped and stabbed 36 times in the face, neck, chest, and back. Like some of the other victims, her stomach had been cut open and her internal organs were outside of her abdominal cavity. It was also reported that her left nipple was completely removed. She had defensive wounds on her hands as well, meaning that she put up a hell of a fight against her killer. And the patrol officer who found her had been checking the area due to a prior burglary, and so it was estimated that she'd been murdered sometime between midnight and 1:40 a.m., just prior to when that patrol officer had found her. She resided not far from the scene, and a witness told the police she had seen Dowd walking with a middle-aged white man with the same round face as described in the other one, only a few hours before. Her clothing was found near her body, and her open purse was in the alley with its contents spilled partly onto the ground. And because nothing had been taken, robbery was ruled out as a motive, so they didn't connect it to whatever robbery had happened that the police had come out for.
Sorry, did you say she was sexually assaulted too?
Yes.
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, definitely robbery's not the motivation then, by the sound of it.
There is one more victim, like I said earlier, that we're going to come back to once I tell you a little bit about the investigation. So anyone who has any familiarity with police investigations can probably tell that the police, in this instance, did a fucking shit job at investigating.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah. Gillian Camacho, a Penn State University researcher. Go Penn State, we are.
Penn State.
Went as far as to say that the Philadelphia police actually lied to the public because it's thought that the police did not reveal enough facts in the case that they had known and discovered initially. And then they continued to mislead the public about there being no serial killer until the fourth victim, Jan, was found. And so people weren't being cautious enough. Not that, it would be their fault if they were murdered, but you know what I mean.
They weren't aware that there is a pattern.
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
there are people who, if they were told there was being a pattern, could have possibly adjusted what they were doing.
Yeah. Ultimately, despite a police sketch, the killer was never found. Fortunately, police did obtain DNA samples from some of the bodies, and hopefully with our current advanced technology for DNA, we might get more information about the killer or even solve these cases at some point. But right now, as far as I'm aware, I don't think it's being tested.
Of course it isn't.
Yeah. The police hypothesized that the killer had followed each of his victims after they left local bars at night or grabbed them before they got to their destination. Police interviewed the employees of the fish market, and Leonard Christopher, who worked there and also lived nearby, told reporters that the store had been burglarized several times recently. When Leonard saw the police in the alley that morning, he just thought, well, I just thought they broke in again, which makes sense. Either that, or they were busting someone for drugs or prostitution. That's his words. We would say drugs or drug paraphernalia and sex work. Both activities were a frequent occurrence in that alley, so it would make sense if that is what happened. When he learned that the police were in fact investigating a murder, he did talk with them and admitted that he had actually already known one of the earlier victims, Margaret Vaughn. Unfortunately, this connection and his understanding of the local area would place him under suspicion. By the way, Abby's leaving Cheddar's in 2 minutes.
Okay.
When asked where he was during the evening before, he claimed he was with his girlfriend, but she told detectives that she had spent the night alone at home. That inconsistency triggered more intense questioning, and investigators located a witness who says they had seen Christopher with Carol Dowd in a bar on the same night that she had been killed. A prostitute, sex worker, who had initially lied, ended up admitting that she too had seen them together outside the bar. That's Carol Dowd and Leonard Christopher. While another placed him coming out of the alley by the fish store. She said that he'd been sweating and he had a large knife in his belt. A search of Leonard Christopher's, apartment turned up clothing that did have blood on it. And by clothing, I mean a pair of pants that had a very tiny stain on it in blood that wasn't enough to test or even link him to a murder. But nonetheless, they counted that as evidence. Christopher called a friend to tell them that the police had suspected him, and then that person came forward, though remaining anonymous, and they did tell the news that their boss had told Christopher to clean up blood from the alley, and so that is how he had gotten that small bit on his phone, or on his clothes. Others who worked with him vouched for his good character and his humanitarian nature, and reported that he was mild-mannered with no history of violence or a criminal record. Leonard Christopher's landlord also confirmed these positive impressions, saying only that he sometimes made too much noise. But other than that, was a great tenant, paid his rent on time, did all the things he needed to do, kept up with it. However, another damning fact for Christopher was his boss's testimony that Christopher seemed to know the details of the murder that were not public knowledge, and a supposed strange confession that he had seen a murder and was having trouble sleeping because he was dreaming about it. He also claimed that he had seen a middle-aged white man murder a woman in the alley, but chose not to say anything because he feared that his life would be in danger if he outed what he had seen, which I guess, could understand. So, the craziest part about Leonard Christopher as a suspect is that he is a 39-year-old black man and clearly not the middle-aged, round-faced white man that multiple witnesses reported in these murders.
Well, so everybody, mentioning these facts, were these all, true thing people were saying, or was a lot of this fabricated?
I think a lot of it was fabricated. I do go a little bit into that during the trial piece here in a second. Even with all of that, Leonard Christopher was arrested on May 5th of 1990 and arraigned on charges of robbery, abuse of a corpse, murder, and possession of an instrument of a crime. He was held in prison without bail. That's an important piece. Keep that in mind. On June 20th, Leonard Christopher was ordered to stand trial for the Dowd murder, since the evidence was deemed sufficient enough by a grand jury. 2 women who knew him, again, as I had mentioned earlier, said they'd seen him that night. One of them was Emma Lay, who said she saw that he had walked into an alley behind the fish store around 1 a.m., and then she heard a woman scream. She left with a man in a car, so she didn't witness any other events. It's assumed that that was an individual paying her for sex work. Linda Washington, the second woman, claimed to have seen Christopher leave the alley carrying his shirt over his arm and sporting a knife in the sheath hanging around his waist. So that's where the, robbery, possession of an instrument of a crime come into play. In the Court of Common Pleas, a jury heard the opening statements on November 29th of 1990, shortly after Thanksgiving. Assistant District Attorney Judith Rubino declared that Christopher was a vicious killer who used a, quote, Rambo-style knife to slash and kill Carol Dowd in the alley behind the fish market where he worked. She admitted she had no witnesses to the actual murder, but she had people who saw things on the street. These witnesses would provide sufficient circumstantial evidence to prove Christopher's guilt. Christopher was seen with Dowd in the alley. A witness heard a woman scream. He was seen leaving the alley, and Dowd was found dead immediately afterward. He was seen with a knife, and his clothing had blood on it. And in addition, he had lied about his whereabouts that night and had made other peculiar statements about the murder, all of which I, went into detail earlier above. Defense attorney Jack McMahon told the jury that Leonard Christopher was known as a mild-mannered person, was well-liked, and had no history of violence. He indicated that since the police were under pressure to solve the case, they must have rushed to judgment. The prosecutor objected to this idea that the police had rushed, and Judge George Ivins cautioned McMahon not to stray from the facts. McMahon continued with this argument, however, indicating that there were 6 cases prior to Dowd's murder that bore enough similarities to be judged the work of a serial killer. But the prosecutor again objected to this line of reasoning. Clearly, McMahon was going to go for reasonable doubt by talking about the murder that occurred while Christopher was in jail awaiting trial.
Is that the one you haven't talked about yet?
Yep. But the prosecutor immediately objected this, and this evidence was never brought forward. The judge ordered a sidebar, and the attorneys began to shout at each other, but McMahon was allowed to continue his line of reasoning with, stipulations. Quote, pressure sometimes presents unreliable results, was his argument. McMahon said that the police had relied on evidence that in stronger cases would have just been discarded. And, as it wouldn't have been done. The witnesses were sex workers and those with substance use disorders, with lengthy arrest records for each of them, and 9 aliases between the 2 witnesses. He could not imagine anyone urging the jury to believe them beyond a reasonable doubt. So he pushed for these characteristics of these individuals to count as making them not credible. One of the prosecution's witnesses, Lee, did admit to lying twice to police about the incident, initially denying that she knew anything because she liked the defendant, and then, again, adds to her unreliableness as a witness. When the police arrested Christopher, his lawyer pointed out that there were no injuries on him and no physical evidence that linked him to the crime. No murder weapon was recovered, no so-called Rambo knife, so there was no reason to view him as a murderer. The trial was short, though, and the closing arguments came quickly on December 11th. McMahon emphasized Christopher's good character and the fact that such violence of which he was accused of was completely out of character for him. The prosecution had offered no motive, no weapon, and no solid evidence. And his statement about the white man on the night of the murder fit the description by other witnesses who had seen this man with the earlier victims. But ADA Rubino asked what motive the witnesses had for lying. In fact, some of them were friends with Christopher, including the one who had lied on his behalf to the police. So there was no reason for that witness to ultimately change her story other than wanting to finally tell the truth. In addition, Rubino reminded the jury that she presented 2 other witnesses who had seen Christopher talking to Dowd in a bar at midnight of the night she was murdered. She had also offered testimony from Christopher's girlfriend, Vivian Carter, that he had not been with her that night as he had originally claimed. Rubino closed with an emotional appeal that included what Carol Dowd must have experienced as she was being attacked with a knife and slashed to death. She knew that her death was coming, Rubino said. The cuts to her hands told the story. And with that emotional ending, Christopher was found guilty on the charges related to the murder of Carol Dowd and sentenced to life in prison on December 12th of 1990. Christopher reported that the police fabricated his false alibi and the testimonies from the 2 witnesses. But despite this, the police were satisfied with their work and hailed this conviction as the final nail in the coffin of the Frankford Slasher.
So,
where do we
can
go
you give me a
here?
spoiler now on this real quick? Did he ever get out of jail?
No.
Really?
He died in jail of cancer.
How long was he in?
I could not find his death date, actually, but speaking of, along these lines, I bet you can guess what I'm going to say. This was not the final nail in the Frankford Slasher's coffin.
All right, guys, let's also take a quick moment here to take a break to listen to a message from some of our friends.
Not all paths are straight. Some twist deep into the unknown. Hey, I'm Amanda Joy, and every Thursday, a new episode of Down the Crooked Path beckons. Paranormal stories, strange encounters, and folklore that lingers long after dark. So take a deep breath, grab your flashlight, or let the mysteries guide your steps. Down the Crooked Path, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thank you guys for listening to that message. Now let's get back to the episode on the Frankford Slasher.
On September 6th, 1990, the body of 30-year-old Michelle Denner, also mentioned with the last name Martin, was found deceased in her apartment, located a block away from Frankford. She'd been stabbed 23 times and was also raped. She'd also previously been a suspect in the murder of Jan Durkin from earlier, because they had once reportedly fought over a blanket. Because at one point she was also without a home. If you recall, Leonard Christopher was held without bail during his trial and was in prison during this murder. Despite this, the jury was not informed of this development, which just so happened to be the most damning evidence that Christopher was not the Frankford Slasher. It is widely believed that there was a significant racial bias against Christopher due to him being black, and I believe all of the women were white women. So clearly the police did not put in an effort to find another potential suspect, but rather went with the best scapegoat that they could find. And honestly, not even a great one considering the racial difference. Like, what the fuck? It didn't help that the newspapers had begun reporting Christopher's alleged involvement prior to the trial, and it basically became a witch hunt for the public to bury this case and consider it solved.
Well, it doesn't matter the court of law or facts of the matter. It's the court of public opinion when you bring out that information prior to a arrest, trial, or conviction.
Yeah.
The court of public opinion does not require facts to really help on anything.
Yeah.
The court of public opinion is more easily swayed. It's like why we think the McDonald's woman who got burned by coffee is an awful person and just stupid when in fact it is very much McDonald's fault.
I do remember, I remember that case. So, despite being murdered with the same modus operandi as the others, the murder of Michelle Denner was attributed by police to that of a, quote, copycat killer, so that they didn't have to do any more investigation. After the murder of Michelle Denner, no more victims were found, identified, or linked to the Frankford Slasher, again solidifying the belief of the public that the police had caught the right person. Or at the very least, it helped to assuage the fear that the public had. However, there are some of the public who continue to believe that the murders remain unsolved, and unfortunately, even if the killer were found, Christopher would never get to see freedom or reparations for the injustice that he received, as he passed away from cancer while serving his life sentence, and he maintained his innocence until his last breath.
I'm just want to say, that's such a miscarriage of justice. That's a huge injustice if he died. Well, not if, because he died with cancer in prison. Never got to see freedom again. He died. Mm-hmm. And just, that sucks because so much just doesn't point to him. Yeah. He's not a white man with a round face. He's a black man. And that's just...
He's literally a place of convenience for the police. It's fucked up.
It's frustrating is what it is.
Yeah. So, why were these murders not taken seriously enough to warrant a deeper investigation into them and to finding the true killer? Well, as you might be able to guess, similar to that of the West Mesa bone collector victims, these victims were considered the outcasts of society. Many of the victims' friends or relatives expressed concern with their loved ones' mental health or their behaviors. The first three victims, Helen, Anna, and Suzanne, were known frequenters of Goldie's bar, as I'd mentioned earlier. And again, sources state that this bar was known for its nightlife and drug abuse, and that it was frequented by people who engaged in sex work, or the barflies that we talked about. This assumption that the women were sex workers, remember, just because you're seen somewhere does not necessarily mean you are engaging in the actions that are associated with that place. So it is an assumption that these women were sex workers, and it would lead to additional speculation that the police were not caring as much due to the nature of these victims. Carol Dowd's brother described her life as uneventful until the late 1960s, when their brother died and she began hearing voices. She was then diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and institutionalized. After being released into a community-based program, she was able to move into an apartment, but she was raped and then ultimately ended up fleeing that apartment. Prior to her murder, she had been living in a community facility where she appeared to be doing really well and was very happy. Just sad. A little opposite of what, the police would have suspected of someone.
Yeah.
Denner was described in the Inquirer as a hard-drinking, paranoid loner and was even called, quote, Crazy Michelle by people in the neighborhood. She was considered somewhat unconventional, sometimes barricading herself into her apartment and other times just tossing things out the window, no matter who might be standing below. Single and hard-edged, she frequented the same bars where the previous murder victims had often gone. As a large blonde, she was often seen in sloppy sweatshirts and jeans and spent her time wandering from one bar to the next. These are all quotes, by the way. Sometimes she sold soft pretzels on the street, but according to those who knew her, she usually spent her time drinking. Neighbors indicated to reporters that she was not very friendly, and one person said that she did not often bathe. A day and a half before her death, she had left the bar with a middle-aged white man. In fact, people had seen her bring men home on several occasions, again fueling the assumption that she was a sex worker. Deanne, Teresa, and Carol were all reportedly in and out of psychiatric institutions throughout their lifetime. And then, again, Michelle was one that was also considered to have gone into mental health institutions. According to the interviews, those who knew Deanne did not believe she could have been overwhelmed easily. At one point, when 6 policemen had tried to arrest her, she struggled so much that they gave up. That led investigators to believe that she may have known her attacker and that he had used cunningness, not strength, to get her into a vulnerable position. In and out of mental health facilities, Jan Durkin had been living on the streets for the past 5 years. She was savvy and independent. Some people felt the same about Helen Patton, believing she would have never gone with a stranger to the train yard. Back and forth as to why these women were found as victims. The facts of the case remain clear, though. All of the victims had been white women, and while their ages differed dramatically from 28 to 68, they had lived or frequented the same area, a honky-tonk strip of Frankford Avenue. They'd all been viciously stabbed and had been killed in ways that left little evidence and no witnesses. They also had a history of mental illness, drug dependency, according to Marissa Bluestein from the Innocence Project of Pennsylvania. She described the women as, quote, women on the edges of society. These women were vulnerable members of society, a fact that the killer took note of and used to his advantage. I did see in some sources that the killer reportedly called himself a minister and posed as a counselor offering guidance and consolation, even renting an office in a nearby church, and would befriend the women at bars. It's reported that once the women left with him, they wouldn't be seen again. No one knows who this man is. It's unknown. It's unsolved. He's never been seen. Though reports claim he looks similar to that of the original description of the killer, a middle-aged, round-faced white man. So was this who they were looking for? We will never know, considering they put the wrong man behind bars and closed the case. So I wanted to add this in here. Do you want to give me your thoughts first, and then I'll add my final little pieces here?
It's frustrating when they look for the wrong person and they don't, and the person gets away. That's always frustrating. What's even more frustrating is whenever somebody who is wrongfully convicted and then dies behind bars.
Absolutely.
I strongly hate that. And that's actually something that's coming out a lot more in the South, is apparently there have been people who've been wrongly convicted, but because freeing them is considered being weak on crime, even whenever the evidence is very crystal clear that the person was not doing it. Right now, Republican state attorneys and state attorney generals are vehemently fighting it. Mississippi is the state where it's really bad, where there's multiple people who were clearly wrongfully convicted, and this one guy's doing everything in his power not to be weak on crime. Doesn't matter if the person was innocent; he wants them to die in prison, and it's awful. The prison state in America, and actually brings me back to another thing in Philadelphia. If you ever go to Eastern State Penitentiary, it has a really good things in there about the current prison state in America and how it's so much different than everywhere else in the world. It's truly something to see. It's something to see. It's something to look into. The prison state of America is something else, and this is kind of a little additional note in the issue at large.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, throughout this, I honestly kind of put my own thoughts in here, so I don't really have much to add on top of that, but
I don't think they're ever going to get the guy if they, think it's the case closed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're investigating it at all. I'm not sure that there's even pushes for that, but I, would hope that if somehow someone is listening to this and they have some information or they know anything, please reach out to the Frankford police.
We do have a very strong Pennsylvania listener body.
Yeah. So this was just not a fun fact, because none of this is fun, but an interesting way to describe this case that I thought I should bring up. So just as there are so many quote locations that have a Roswell, this is the same with Jack the Ripper, and the Frankford Slasher is no different. So some people call the Frankford Slasher Pennsylvania's Jack the Ripper, Philadelphia's Jack the Ripper. One source cites that 3 of the primary reasons that Jack the Ripper has remained to this day the most infamous serial killer of all time is because 1, the given name of Jack the Ripper, and no true name given. 2, the risks that the killer took to reach his victims. And 3, that he was never apprehended. So, the Philadelphia Ripper, aka Frankford Slasher, also has these same 3 things. This is a serial killer, anonymous to this day, who is virtually unknown. Instead of the condition of anonymity, which served as a prime factor towards the popularity of Jack the Ripper, the anonymity of the slasher has served him poorly because Christopher was able to be used as a scapegoat. The slasher, unlike 2 other serial killers operating in Philadelphia at the same time, Heidnik and Graham, neither of which faced any real risk in their killings, they selected street sex workers and killed them in their homes. We don't need to do their cases, they're caught. Anyway, this Frankford Slasher, like Jack the Ripper, took exceptional risks, having killed in the homes of the victims and on the streets, just as Jack the Ripper had 100 years earlier in London. Because if you know anything about Jack the Ripper case, some of them were killed on the streets, and there were some that were killed in their homes. And then if the sentiments expressed by people from time to time in Philadelphia are accurate, the convicted party, Leonard Christopher, in the Dowd murder, killed her and her alone, or none of them at all. And this would mean that the Frankford Slasher is either still alive and dormant, because it's only been 30 years at this point, in prison, dead, or moved on to safer crimes. Thus, the real killer...
I hate that word, safer crimes.
Yeah, I know. It's just the best way to put it, of petty crimes, maybe? Would petty crimes fit better? Less
violent crimes.
Yeah, non-violent crimes. Thus, the real killer continues to be unknown and unapprehended. And therefore, I'm going to make the connection that this is Pennsylvania or Philadelphia's Jack the Ripper. Other people have made that connection too. That's not just me making that up, but I'm gonna I'm going to call it that too. Any final thoughts on that?
Fuck whoever did this.
Yeah.
Fuck the people who crucified a black man for this.
Yeah. So I just wanted to point this out here.
Fuck
So
the
I
Philadelphia
actually,
Flyers too.
yeah, also fuck them for sure, and the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and Reading Royals. So I actually found this case in a book called Unsolved Serial Killers. This is volume 2 of it. 10 more frightening true crime cases of unidentified serial killers, the ones that you've never heard of, by D.R. Werner. And I, in fact, had not heard of any of the 10 that were in this book. So you guys might get more stories from this at a later time. It was very interesting. I believe Frank's mom actually got it for me because she saw it and thought of me. And it was a really interesting read. There's one in there that is currently, I believe, solved since the writing of that book. But I didn't get a chance to look at all the other ones. But this one was not solved. So, in my opinion, this one was not solved. I do not believe that Leonard Christopher was responsible for the deaths of these women. He didn't fit the description of the killer. I think it was a racial bias. All of those things. But yeah, so I mean, if you have any interest in that, go check it out. It was a really interesting read. And obviously our other, sources and stuff will be in the description below as well.
You want to hear some fun facts, Sage?
Yeah.
There's a volume 1 and a volume 3 of this book. They're all on Kindle Unlimited.
Oh, cool. So I'll have to take a look.
Yeah.
Wrapping up here, because part of this case and a reason that I picked it's not only because it's based in Philadelphia, which is pretty close to us, like relatively speaking, is because it focuses a lot on the vulnerability of mental health and, miscarriage of justice and things like that. Just a reminder to everybody that May, because this is coming out on May 4th, May the 4th be with you. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It was founded in 1949 by Mental Health America to fight stigma, provide support, and educate the public on mental well-being. It highlights that 1 in 5 adults experience some type of mental illness in their lifetime. It encourages open conversations, community connection, and access to care. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please contact your local crisis number by searching crisis in your search engine or dialing or texting 988 for the suicide crisis hotline. You can also dial or text 911 for help as well. So in the description below, I'm going to have Frank put links to the relevant information for mental health. So the 988lifeline.org will be down there, as well as it's called NAMI. It's the national mental health organization for the country. I'm also going to have that put down there because there's going to be some events and stuff that they have listed that I think are great things to attend. So, you guys know I'm a big proponent of advocating for mental health and things like that. And so, I wouldn't be doing myself, justice or my job justice if I didn't make mention of that. So, but that is me on my soapbox, and now I am hopping off of it.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to say for final things, or you want me to wrap it up? Because I've given my final thoughts. I don't really have anything else to say.
I am good to wrap it up.
All right. So, first off, Sage, thank you for that wonderful case. Well, not necessarily wonderful, but that very interesting and perplexing case.
Yeah.
I thought that was something else. I did look up. Not as many podcasts as I would have thought have actually covered this. This is more or less covered. So definitely more niche. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, cool. I didn't really look into Morbid it. Morbid hasn't even done it.
Oh, well, maybe Morbid will now that we've done it. I'm just kidding. That would be crazy.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. We really appreciate every listener that comes here. If you're liking what you're listening to, go like, comment, review, subscribe, whatever you like to do on whatever platform you're on. Every little bit helps us and boosts us in the algorithm. We really appreciate it. We like seeing you guys come back here every week to hear more stories from us. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us on our Instagram for tales you want to do. And hopefully I'll start putting our email on here so you guys can submit stories or recommendations. With that being said, I think it's time for us to sign out, Sage. So remember
to look for
the unknown,
the unsolved,
and the unseen.
Thanks for listening.
Bye, guys. Fuck the Flyers. Go Pens.
Take care of yourself. Take care of your mental health.
Yep. Bye.